chose chapter 7, making the content relevant to students. I decided to expand in this because I thought it was really important about meeting people where they're at, depending on whether their age group or their gender or whatever you are. You have to know your audience, and I think it's very important to know your audience. Just because I hold a certain amount of information, just because I've been invited or been told to teach this specific subject, doesn't mean that it's my way or the highway, because that's how we really lose our audience. That's how we do not connect with them, and that's how we end up teaching and then it goes in one ear and out the other. We want to have a long-term goal where these students are able to walk away and be transformed by the information. Now, if it's like, how can you be transformed by algebra? Well, you can. Whether they get engaged or excited, how can they get excited about history? There's so many different subjects that are just totally not appealing. I mean, my goodness, I didn't think history was really appealing to me. But it's how the teacher teaches it, how he gets me involved, and how I get excited about it that really drew me into wanting to go to class every day and wanting to be involved every day. Now, one of the things is that what is relevancy? So it's about being able to teach something to a student, and that student's able to draw to the subject, whether it's through desire or liking of what you're teaching them. And usually it's based off of their own experience, whether you're talking about history, what does that have anything to do with them? And really trying to relate to them and why it's important to them. Now, some of the other things I kind of talk about is immediacy, about how to connect with the student, knowing your audience, about having relationships with them, and then how we come off, verbals, nonverbals, whether it's not just with our voice, but how we kind of put off our nonverbals to the student, our involvement to them, and our connection that we're trying to make. So there's quite a few different factors that kind of go into trying to connect with the student, not just relevancy based off the subject, but us, ourselves, the environment that we create in the classroom, the words that we speak to the student. Do we speak to them, or do we try to speak over them, or do we try to meet them where we're at instead of us meeting them where they're at? And so those are some of the few things that is very important. Now, one of the concepts I talk about in some of the research articles that I was reading is persuasion. So there's a likelihood elaboration model that talks about persuading, where you use your central route or your peripheral route. Your peripheral route is based off of surface cues, basically, the way you act, the way you talk. If you're cool, I like you. The way you dress, I like your shoes. If I don't, and then whatever you say will either make me, I will most likely go for your persuasion that you're trying to persuade me on. Now, the central route is more based off of my experience. If you say something, I'm going to weigh it based off of what I've been through, my past experience, things like that. Now, they're talking about this elaboration likelihood model to be kind of something that could stand in the way of a student getting more involved or engaged in the material. That relevancy wouldn't even matter. For instance, a student goes into a classroom, for whatever reason, they just don't like history. They probably had a bad experience. Maybe they always fail every time they take the history class. Or it may be the teacher. Maybe it be a female teacher. Maybe they don't have a good experience with female teachers and they never feel like they connected with that female teacher, or something of that sort. They already have a predisposed experience. They already have an experience that they've already had. So no matter what the teacher tries to be relevant and tries to connect with the student, they already have this central route. When they use a central route, they already have that past experience. So you say something that it doesn't matter what you say, they don't like it, they don't want to hear it, no matter if you try to relate or connect to them. Now, those are just some of the things that kind of you run into. Some of the other weaknesses that you kind of run into in trying to be relevant with the students is that one of the things I talked about was the inner city. There was a study done on trying to get students connected to earth science. And how can you be relevant? Well, one of the things that many teachers tend to get kind of run into is that a lot of the teachers that come to be a teacher in inner cities were not raised in the inner city, so there's no connection on that. They may not have an experience where they can try to be relevant with the student, give examples, or even try to do material that's based off of that ability to get the child involved in more and more of the subject. So one of the things that Burkick, one of the researchers, said, you have to make the student, the relevancy where you can connect the student and the subject is not always the experience from the teacher to the student, but having the teacher connect the student with the environment, and in this case, the earth science. So in this case, the teacher was able to take the students to a nearby river that was near the inner city, that wasn't too far off, and able to give the students the ability to explore and experience it themselves from everything they had learned in class. Therefore, there was a connection made. There was that relevancy to their city and to the information and the education they were trying to get from the teacher. So that was really amazing how relevancy is not always trying to be relevant with the student, is not always based off of, okay, how can I relate to the student? How can I relate to the audience? It's simply finding out what they're about, knowing who they are, and connecting them to that very thing. And you are just simply the one that brings those two things together, not always you having to be the one that's connecting with them. Now, because the teacher was able to connect the student and the environment based off the trying to relate to the information they're trying to gather, like the environment, this caused a connection. This caused the students to be engaged, and they were getting excited, and they loved what they were learning, and their statistically the percentages started going up on their ability to connect. See, and that was just really amazing. So that was a great strength and a great thing to teach about relevancy, of that it's not always based off of, you know, you and the other individual, but simply on the subject itself. Now, the other thing that is really good to, another weakness that I really want to discuss is that the students, you can be relevant, you can have that information, but it's simply weighing on how are you trying to be relevant. Well, a lot of things that they talk about is when a student does not like is when the teacher tries too hard, when the teacher's not themselves, when they try to be something they're not. Those are a few things when a teacher tries to be relevant, their inability to be relevant, or maybe they just don't know how to be relevant, that they try too hard and the student just does not like it. But what else? How else can we connect with the student? And some of the things that they suggested were, as the research have suggested, were find out what the student goals are, their visions, their dreams, and things like that, that it doesn't always have to be maybe who they are, but what goals they're trying to reach. What are their careers that one day they want to do? How can you relate to that? And so that was another tool that they've given, so that the content, whatever's created, you know a little bit about your student and the examples that you give, so that you can connect their goals, their dreams, their future careers to the very thing that they're learning right now. That has been that has given the instructor, even teachers, the ability to connect both the information as well as the student from why they're learning. That is probably the biggest questions that students tend to ask. Why? Why do I have to know this? How come? What's the point? Do I really need this? I'm gonna go be a construction worker, or I'm gonna go be a doctor, or I'm gonna go do this, or I'm gonna go do something that has nothing to do with math, or why do I need history? What's the point? And so by really knowing a student and really knowing their goals, their vision, their dreams is another way to kind of connect them with that material. This is something that can also backfire, because if the student is just not engaged, then they're simply just not engaged. The other thing that can help the student get connected is their motivation. That's probably one of the key things that helps them get motivated. Are their peers motivated in it? Are they interested in this subject? So if you can create an environment that causes the student to see that there are other peers that are involved, their peers are liking it, then most likely it'll be more of like the social judgment theory, where if they're doing it, then I'm going to do it too. And so that's a little bit another tool that you can also use. Another tool that is also great to help create relevancy, as well as getting the kids or students or anybody engaged, is simply hands-on type projects, or whether it's handwriting, whether it's group projects, or anything where they have the ability to apply what they're learning in their everyday life, or simply creating something and putting it to use. Because it's one thing to learn, it's one thing to get educated and informed, but now I can make it happen. Whether it's a business plan where one day they had their own business where they have to use algebra in order to create that, or simply writing their own history or how it relates to them, or something of that sort. So the idea is to get the students involved, get the students engaged so that they can continue to learn, continue to be engaged. It's not about compromising the information. It's not about changing the history or the true foundations of all the education that is given or the information that we're giving, but it's simply changing the approach. That is the goal. Change the approach, and then you can get the students' attention.